My name is Petra Sultan, I should have said that. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education for Thrive, the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. And I wanted to just let you know a couple of things going on right now with Thrive that you might be interested in. And one of the things we're doing right now is we're doing a survey of nonprofits. We did this a year ago, and we really want to see where the nonprofit community is. We're working on some really digging deep into what's going on in the nonprofit community in San Mateo so that we can work on what we're calling this our Strategic Alliances project to help bolster the nonprofit community in the county. So we'll put the link in the chat. So if you're a nonprofit and you haven't filled out the survey yet, we would love it if you do. We are continuing our work on voting. It's not an election year this year, but there is a lot going on. First of all, with redistricting, and also, for instance, Proposition 17, now parolees can vote, but we need to reach out to them and let them know that. So if you're interested in being part of our voting outreach, you can sign up for our meeting next week. Those meetings are open to everyone. We also are doing something fun for Earth Day. We have an environmental sustainability group, and this month we decided to highlight 11 organizations in San Mateo County that are doing protecting our lands, and to talk about what their equity plans are as well as what their current stewardship is. So it'll be a really great way to get to know a lot of what's going on in our county. We have fantastic open spaces, and it'll be an opportunity to learn more deeply about who's taking care of them. And with that, I want to thank our partner and introduce our partner, the Social Impact Advisory Group, specifically Maya, who's going to talk a little bit about both this series that we're doing on resiliency and today's agenda. So with that, thank you very much, Maya.
Great, thank you, Petra. So welcome all to the Social Impact Advisory Groups. And this is the first of a series called Managing for Resilience Speaker Series in collaboration with Thrive. We developed this Managing for Resilience series to give leaders in the nonprofit sector the opportunity to learn, discuss, and share those factors that help them deliver on their mission in the face of adversity. And it gives us at Fairlight, particularly, the opportunity to highlight why being proactive to manage risks that an organization might be exposed to is a good thing. And we're learning from 2020 why that's necessary to incorporate into your organization. This series will profile experts in human resources and fundraising, finance, and governance who've coached many organizations on what it takes to thrive and survive. So a little bit about me. I'm a partner and co-founder of Fairlight Advisors, and we provide investment management and financial consulting to purpose-driven organizations to help fund their missions effectively. My partner, Catherine Earhart, is also in the room, and we organize this Social Impact Advisory Group with others like ourselves who serve social impact organizations and nonprofits as consultants and board members, donors, public officials, and even just interested citizens to bring increased awareness to the needs of the nonprofit sector to promote their stability and strength. And if you're interested in hearing more Social Impact Advisory Group events, Catherine will put in the chat a place where you can sign up for our events. We also advertise them on Thrive's site if you are a Thrive member. So I am going to introduce you to our speaker today, Sally Carlson, who is the managing partner of Carlson Beck, LLC, and she's going to talk about recruiting and hiring best practices in this new reality. And with things looking like the economy might turn a corner, effective hiring and recruiting has come into greater focus. But Sally will show us that effective hiring may require us to question more closely our closely held beliefs about who is a good fit, even for the most open-minded of people. Just a quick introduction for Sally. She founded Carlson Beck in 2011 to focus exclusively on nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. Her nonprofit clients have included the Obama White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Arizona Community Foundation, Melinda Gates' investment office, Pivotal Ventures, and various international NGOs. And we will focus and grill her on some of those projects that she'd have, because we're very interested. So let's turn to you, Sally. What specifically drew you to focus recruiting exclusively for the philanthropic sector?
Great. Thanks, Maya, for that lovely introduction. And great to see everyone this morning. Thanks for participating. So when I pivoted my firm to focus exclusively on the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors, at that point in time, I had been a 20-year volunteer at the board level with nonprofit organizations. And I was working, my day job had been in management consulting or capital markets or private equity real estate investment management. And it was very interesting, but it wasn't as, quite frankly, it wasn't as personally gratifying as my volunteer work in the nonprofit sector. And so one of the things I learned during the Great Recession, where literally, again, working in private equity real estate, the industry shut down. I mean, firms were going through multiple rounds of layoffs. We all remember what that economic environment was. But the doors were kept open and the lights on at my firm because of the nonprofit sector, our nonprofit clients. People said, well, how can that be, Sally? I mean, things are sort of economically crashing. And I said, many of these organizations have multi-year grants. And if you need a new CEO or president, you need a new CEO or president. And so we did actually some of our biggest and best work during the economic recession. That includes working for the Obama White House. So what that did for me is it demonstrated there is a real business here, and I could pivot. That's a very popular word from 2020, as we've all learned to pivot in different ways. I could pivot my focus and the focus of my firm to exclusively nonprofit and philanthropic entities, which is what I did, and spun my practice area out of my former firm to focus. And it's been great. I wake up every day joyful to do this work because I get to work with interesting, smart, mission-driven, purpose-focused professionals. So it really is a delight. So that's what led me to where I'm at now.
Well, you opened the door to Obama White House, and so I want to ask you. A number of us in the room would love to hear about specifically, when you're hiring for very public organizations like a White House administration or Melinda Gates, who's a public figure. I imagine that the hiring practice is very well thought out, rigorous, and could potentially, if it goes wrong, be a public disaster. What can smaller organizations learn from that?
Sure. So one of the things that is true for both the search that we did for the White House, as well as the search work we've done quite recently with Melinda Gates and Pivotal Ventures, is there is a level of rigor that the client brings to the table. So they have a process, or they have clarity on what they're seeking. And they need someone to be a thought partner and then an execution partner of go out and find great talent. But they're very clear on where they're starting and what they're looking for. They're also very good at expectation setting and expectation fulfillment as a partner. So I will say one thing that was true for the White House search was it is the only time in my entire search career where I slept with my phone. And that was because if the White House called, they expected you to pick up. And they didn't care if it was 4:30 in the morning and you happen to have a search partner colleague at the White House who likes to start their day early. So it's 7:30 in DC and they are just starting their day. And that could be calling to say, how's the search going? And you need to be ready to answer. You
need to wake up really quickly.
Exactly. You just need to be coherent out of the blocks. but the level of rigor, and then not only for the client, creating a context of understanding, here's the broader talent pool, here's the context of what we're seeing and what we're hearing from the talent pool, and then narrowing it down is our responsibility. And it's that commitment of transparency, and it's also the commitment of research, because one of the things that we are putting our reputational capital on the line is that we're going to find professionals for you who any of them could do this job, but moreover, none of them would embarrass you. So, we do our own independent research on the candidates as well. President Obama did announce our placement when we concluded the search, and we have done three searches, the most recent one concluding last month, for Melinda Gates and Pivotal Ventures. And Melinda's organization, that's her investment and incubation office. So the Gates Foundation sort of sits in the middle, and we're all familiar with it, and it is quite a behemoth. On adjacent sides, Bill has his executive office, and Melinda has hers, and hers is Pivotal Ventures. She runs that as an investment and incubation firm. So she will have an idea, an area for impact that she would like to see, and then she will work with the Pivotal Ventures team to structure, in essence, a proof of concept, and then invest in it, and then run it for 2 to 3 years. And if it is successful and impactful in the way envisioned, then it will get scaled. But it's a very nimble, quick, it feels very much like a technology organization, technology-based and enabled. As you would imagine, they use Microsoft Teams for their meetings, not Zoom. But one of the things I can say about both environments, the White House and Pivotal, is just the caliber of professionals. I mean, you really feel like these are best in class folks, oftentimes very, very mission driven. If they were in the private sector, they would be executives at high levels, and they are working with a mission focus. So very exciting.
Great. Thank you for that background. I told you before we jumped on that I want to jump right into the current environment, that remote work has changed the recruiting landscape, and that a number of people, particularly toward the tail end of 2020, were being hired remotely. Can you talk a little about the opportunities and the challenges of that kind of process?
Sure. So, colleagues, if someone would have told me even a year and a half ago, Sally, you'll work with a client whom you've never met in person. You'll be in partnership with a search committee and a board of directors for a CEO search, and you won't meet any of the candidates in person. The client will not meet any of the candidates in person, and yet they will go through a process, and they will hire a CEO whom they will then onboard virtually. And if you would have said that to me, I would have said, that causes my head to explode. Well, voila, the pandemic in 2020, and my head was exploding, but clients were doing exactly that. And so during 2020, we opened, executed, and closed multiple searches at multiple levels throughout the country. So one of the things that virtual recruiting and hiring has demanded is it requires more communication and more interaction. So previously, if you felt like, okay, the CEO candidates are going to show up and there'll be a panel interview with the search committee, great. After that, there's additional dialogue, and it might mean, again, via Zoom, small group meetings with the candidates. So you can continue the dialogue, continue the conversation. You're trying to really get to know the person in a way that pre-COVID you would have done in a cafe over coffee, or maybe you would have gone out to lunch or breakfast. Now it's yet another Zoom meeting. And it's multiple Zoom meetings because you're really trying to establish a rapport. You're trying to get a sense of the person, and they're trying to do the same with all of the search committee members. And then there is what we call meet and greets with staff. Typically, that's the executive team. It might go one level down in the organization. And it's not an interview, and we're very explicit. This is not an interview of your potential new boss. It is an opportunity for you to meet the candidates and for you to ask questions and learn about them, but they're also going to be asking questions of you. And so typically we prompt the staff to address a couple of areas. We ask them to speak to the candidates about what they view to be the challenges and opportunities for their organization. Oftentimes staff's responses to that question is very different to the board's responses to that question. And then we also ask the staff to speak to what do you need from the new CEO in order to do your best work? And what that reveals is some of the internal or external challenges that that particular staff member is experiencing in the execution of his or her responsibilities. It could be internal. We need to spend $30,000 on this new system. It could be external. I would really love to get the support of this person at City Hall for our program.
So what I hear you saying is it's almost like a reverse interview, that the candidate is now interviewing the staff on what if you could make things better, what would you do? And that's the focus.
Exactly, Maya. And it's a way for the candidate to then learn more about the staff members. And then the candidate has an opportunity to talk about his or her vision for the organization, and also talk about what they would need from the staff in order to be successful in the CEO role, and how they would approach management, team building, collaboration, etc. So it's revealing without being an interrogation, because we have had some meet and greets become more of an interrogation. And let me just say, that goes in a bad direction really fast. So then it's just all of this interaction takes place via Zoom. So there just needs to be more of it. And because of the convenience of Zoom, we found people are often able to carve out time on weekends or after hours for these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of touched about things not going wrong. You know, you're often brought in when internal recruiting hasn't worked. What are indications that an interview could suggest a candidate is a good or bad fit? I mean, you work more at the executive director, CEO, but this could be apply across the board.
Sure. So what I think what clients are looking for, client organizations, and certainly we're looking for, is out of the blocks, I mean, just table stakes, is an alignment with the mission. Are you passionate about this organization's mission? And that can be true in the private sector as well. I mean, do you have an interest in this particular aspect of consumer goods or retail or manufacturing? But that alignment and interest in mission is critical. So if you don't have that, it's probably not going to go very far. From there, we then look at how does the professional meet the qualifications the client has said they're seeking. So there needs to be sufficient, this person has the skill set to do the job. From an equity perspective, we look at, are there areas in which this professional would need some enhancement, backstopping, professional development, training in order to be more well qualified? Because we want to identify that and call that out to the client, because they may find that candidate's candidacy to be attractive, but they're concerned about some aspect of what they may not be bringing to the table. And so, and that's oftentimes the case as we're looking, to broaden the talent pool, and we're looking at more diverse professionals. And I will say that, oftentimes is this a good candidate, not so good candidate, is a function of how the client perceives culture fit. Oh, this person would be a great fit with our culture, or I'm not seeing this person fit in with our organization's culture. And the tricky part of that is particularly, again, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is if you're looking for people who are a good culture fit, what we encourage our clients to do is really open the aperture of how you're defining culture fit, because it is human nature, it's unconscious bias to, as you're looking for culture fit, to basically replicate only what you already have. So if you really want diversity, you actually may want a professional who's going to take you out of your comfort zone into a place that's a little more uncomfortable, where there's going to be some organizational learning. So that clarity, we do invite clients to think about that and engage in discussion both internally and with us on how open are they to how they're defining culture, who would or wouldn't be a good culture fit, what they're seeking on diversity, and why. You know, what's the desired outcome from your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts.
This is a great segue into DEI, and you know, there's been years now evidence showing that diverse teams is not just from a justice perspective, but actually delivers better performance. When did you start seeing interest in DEI recruiting by employers, and what's different now, and what's the same, and what needs to change?
Sure. So when we think of diverse hiring, I mean, if you sort of look at the long arc of work, going back to the 60s, it was part of the equal rights movement. If you look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and some of the early definitions of it, it actually was gender-based, gender-focused. So that was taking place in the 90s, where it was, how do we increase the number of women who are part of our teams? Diversity hiring continued with the advancement of the LGBTQ rights movement. So that has happened within the last 20 years. Specific to looking at Latinx diversity hiring, that's happened as the Latinx population, certainly in California, but also broadly in the South, has increased. And then it's really been within the last 5 years and hyper-focused within the last 12 months, 14 months, post the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that really exploded nationally and internationally. So, so now organizations, this was true previously, pre-2020, but now typically the number one ask that a client is making of us is they want a slate of diverse candidates. And so then we get into a whole discussion of how are they defining diversity? And that's a very customized to an organization's current employee composition. Almost always what clients say when they say diversity is that what they mean is race and ethnicity. So, and so we just want to explicitly call that out and say, is that what you mean? Or are you thinking along gender lines, sexual orientation lines, religion, age, lived experience, socioeconomic backgrounds? So, so we want the clients to be very thoughtful about what they mean about DEI when it comes to hiring.
And you've said, you know, when you spoke to Petra and me, you were talking about, you know, the reality of actually recruiting and managing a diverse team is very different, and that you've had to challenge some clients that what they wanted was not actually the right approach. Could you talk about some experience and examples of that?
Sure. So here's Here's an example, a recent example. We were working on a CEO search for an organization based in Oakland. And the organization came out of, it was founded by some Chinese American activists. And they are a community development organization. So the board and the search committee of the board very explicitly said, we would like a professional of color to be the next CEO because we have a history, and our genesis is of a community of color. And the search committee was populated by a very diverse group of professionals along racial and ethnic lines. So we presented 5 candidates, 4 of whom were professionals of color. One was a white female. And the search committee interviewed all 5 candidates, and then they did their debrief where they talked about, relative strengths and areas for professional development or, perceived weaknesses on each of the candidates. And as I was listening to their comments, the part that actually caused, once again, using the head exploding metaphor, I was appalled, because basically what they said, how they assessed the candidates, and I did call this out to them. I said, based on what you've just said, you want a white, heteronormative male, because everything that you've said that's a criticism or an area for professional development reflects the individual's cultural normative background. So I said, you've asked for professionals of color with their own unique lived experience, but you've basically said you want Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE. So I said, you have 48 hours. I said, talk amongst yourselves, but you need to. And I said, this is not uncommon. I mean, we all bring our lived experience, our experience of hiring people. So I said, you have some unconscious bias going on here. So, do engage with each other to figure out what your priorities are and how you're going to view a professional who brings their cultural background with them, and how you will view that and work with that individual in order to engender their success. Mm-hmm. So
how have you, I mean, how it's very hard to try to coach an organization or a hiring group to say, it's not going to feel comfortable. And I think of this was a number of years ago, it was an African-American head of an investment committee who was being praised for having such a diverse team. And he said, it's so hard. I'm managing far more staff miscommunications. There are a lot more talks to bosses about complaining because people see things from a different angle. How are you kind of with respect to recruiting that it may not feel warm and fuzzy
right
to do this?
Well, yeah, exactly, Maya. It may not feel warm and fuzzy, and it's harder than it appears. I mean, so what we're seeing is organizations are focused on diversity. And my comment for all of the participants here who have a financial background, I think of diversity as like the balance sheet of an organization. It's a snapshot in time. It's your statistics. We have X percentage of our employees who are African American, X percentage who are AAPI, X percent Latinx, etc. But it's a set of statistics, a set of numbers. The harder part is the inclusion part of DEI. That is like your financial statement, your income statement. On your income statement reflects, the activity every day of how you're driving revenue every day, what operating expenses you're incurring and paying. Your inclusionary actions have to be that dynamic also. They have to be present, they have to be daily, and they have to be woven into, this is part of our business model, this is part of our human capital model. This is how we include all of our employees and what they bring to the table. Sometimes that's via affinity groups. Sometimes it's having specific training, but it needs to be woven in again every day. And then the equity portion, that's like the statement of changes in financial position, which oftentimes illuminates what a company or an organization, where they've invested their capital. And when you think of equity, that is an investment in an individual or a group of individuals in helping them get to a comparable level or opportunity. So I found that that's for business and financial professionals, that's just a helpful way to think about DEI. So we encourage and advise our clients, and we look for this at the front end. How much DEI work have you actually done? So in preparation for asking for a diverse professional to join your team. If it's a CEO position and good candidates will look, the first thing they'll do is they'll go to the organization's website and they'll review the board. And if the board is not diverse, that is a red flag. And what we've found currently in this very, very focused environment of organizations wanting professionals of color as their executive leaders, that these leaders now have choices in ways that are exciting, but it also means it's also highly competitive. So organizations have to distinguish themselves. And we have heard from executives of color where they have said, Sally, I don't want to be the sharp point of the spear. If this organization wants diversity, they need to demonstrate that they're already on a path and they're taking it seriously, versus hiring the CEO of color and saying, look, we're a diverse, aware organization. So,
that's a great point. I mean, I think it's almost like organ rejection. I've heard of horrible stories of, actually, it was a nonprofit a number of years ago where they, this is kind of the inverse. They had typically had only women in leadership, and they thought we need a man to, but they had never really thought about what that was going to look like. And a friend of mine told me he really, he was pushed out because he just really, this was the first time they had never really, as you said, done the work to prepare for what that mindset was going to entail.
So one of the things we learned the hard way several years ago, we were asked to find the executive director for an organization where the person would follow the long-time 33-year founding executive. And the board and the staff actually had a lot of clarity and alignment on the profile of the desired new executive. What we failed to ask at that time was, what would you do if you actually get that person? Like, what's your capacity to be flexible, to be accommodating, or adaptable? And so we placed an individual, a professional, who checked the boxes that board and staff had on their respective lists. And the person lasted less than 3 years. And I know that during much of that 3-year period, it was tough sledding for everyone. There was a lot of friction. And so what we failed to ask was that question about adaptability, capacity, and the new executive brought a lot of technology change, which the organization had said they wanted. Please bring us into the 21st century. And then with all of the new systems, et cetera, people were literally, their hair was on fire every day of, oh my heavens, I have to learn these 2 new systems. And oh, there's going to be a 3rd new system coming down the road. So we've learned now to very explicitly ask those questions at the front end. And it's not, I know that we say this to organizations, and I know that there have been organizations that have elected to not work with us because it's a little bit of that, oh my heavens, we're gonna have to work really hard and be uncomfortable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sally. I wanted, before we do our